what's going on, guys? I'm Aaron from PhoneDog.com, and let's say you're in that situation where you need a new phone and you're thinking, do I really need the physical QWERTY keyboard? Should I go all touch? And you'll find that in a lot of situations, in most cases, the fact of having no keyboard often equals a larger screen. So you look and say, do I want that larger screen or do I want that physical QWERTY keyboard? So it's a challenging battle, challenging thing to decide, but one thing's for sure, there's some great devices regardless of which carrier you look at. You have the HTC EVO Shift 4G on Sprint, a small little device, smaller display, but has an awesome QWERTY keyboard. And then you have the Samsung Fascinate on Verizon, one of the Galaxy S devices, big 4-inch Super AMOLED display. It's the cousin to the Epic 4G, but it's much thinner because it doesn't have that physical QWERTY keyboard. Pocketable, cool, big display, physical QWERTY keyboard, still fast, but hey, it's a little bit smaller. Which one's going to win? We're going to do a dogfight, pit these together, see which one comes out on top. Special thanks to our friends at Best Buy Mobile. They've hooked us up with two of these. We're going to give them away to you in our One Paw Bandit game. So one thing I like, when I go into Best Buy Mobile, you don't have to deal with mail-in rebates. You walk in to buy this or you walk in to buy this. It's $149 and $199 or whatever the sale price is right now. No messy paperwork. Super cool on that front. Enough of that. Let's get into the dogfight. EVO Shift, Fascinate. Which one's going to win? We'll find out in the review. So here they are, the HTC EVO Shift 4G and the Samsung Fascinate. One on Sprint, one on Verizon. This one's $149.99. After rebates, you can get it instantly at Best Buy Mobile, and I'm sure at places like Wirefly, etc., etc. Some of those places will have the device for cheaper if you sign up for a full 2-year agreement. Now this one, $199.99. Again, you can probably find it cheaper, but at a corporate Verizon store, $199.99. Both of these have 5-megapixel cameras. This has an 800 megahertz next generation Snapdragon processor. Which, while it sounds like it's a little bit slower, it's not. It's next generation. It performs very well in speed tests. We'll see how these two match up, but I think you'll be in for a little bit of a surprise. 1 gigahertz Hummingbird processor here, 4-inch Super AMOLED display, so the display on the Fascinate is much better than the display on the EVO Shift. Not to say that it's bad at all. It's 3.6-inch display. It's right around the size of the Droid Incredible on Verizon, so if you're familiar with that, you're familiar with the way the one looks on the EVO Shift. So running HTC Sense, Android 2.2. This is still running Android 2.1, and it's running Samsung's TouchWiz user interface, which is, at least in my opinion, very closely mimics the iPhone. Obviously, about a week ago, or up until a week ago, rather, we didn't know that the iPhone was coming to Verizon. So when people came and said, which phone should you get? My recommendation was always the Fascinate, because it looks the most like, if people like that iOS experience, scrolling right to left, adding, individual colorful, apps to the panels here, it provides the most close experience to iPhone or to iOS. So it's a nice comparison. Obviously now the iPhone's coming to Verizon, so it doesn't really, doesn't matter that much anymore unless you want Android for the widgets. But still, it's intended to mimic the iPhone. So you have two very different operating system experiences here. Oddly enough, it's funny because both of these are running Android, but if you looked at them on a store retail display or something of that nature, if you're holding them side by side, they don't look alike at all, even though they're both running, relatively recent builds of Android. This is running Android 2.2, and the reason why is because manufacturers often will install custom skins on their devices. So what you see on the EVO Shift 4G is what's called HTC Sense, and you can see that the buttons down here are a little bit different from the way the button structure looks on TouchWiz, which is Samsung's custom user interface. So a lot of differences across the board. I've always said, Sense is one of my favorites because I think it appeals to the widest range of people. It appeals to the beginners because it's very easy to use, very easy to learn, and it appeals to the advanced people as well because at its core it still looks very much like an Android device, the way things slide, the way it looks, the way, there's always a segment of people that are going to prefer stock Android, but still, I think it's a great balance between the two, whereas I think this appeals to first-time smartphone buyers, people that want to go to Android and want something that looks like the iPhone, but I think anybody past intermediate users that really know what Android is, they're going to shy away from this in favor of something like the Droid X on Verizon or the Droid 2 or the Droid Incredible. So I happen to like HTC Sense a lot, but you can just see some of the subtle differences. There's 7 home screens on, and not so subtle differences. There's 7 home screens on this one, and there are 7 on this one as well by scrolling back and forth from right to left. Now these both have widgets. They have the typical Android widgets, and then they have their own as well. So we'll take a look at the individual widgets, and this is a place where I have to give HTC a lot of credit. I mean, they've done a killer job with their widgets. You look at this long list of widgets. You have, obviously the option to use the Android widgets as well as the HTC widgets. So you look here, for example, at Calendar. You could choose to use the Android one if you wanted to, or you could use HTC's version. And I mean, these are very clean, beautiful looking widgets. And to me, between, HTC Sense, between Samsung's TouchWiz user interface, and between Motorola's Moto Blur user interface, HTC takes it in widgets. They're just very well thought out. You can see the calendar widget there looks great, the agenda widget, and then a little smaller widget for your calendar. So it does, I love the way they look. And you get down into ones like, let's say, messages, for example. Absolutely beautiful, very rounded, very clean looking, and overall I'm very pleased. So when you go back to the main screen, you look at the clock here and the weather, all of that's HTC. That's part of HTC Sense, and it's pre-installed on this device. Excuse me. And then you scroll over, and you have your bookmarks widget, your friend stream. You scroll over here and you see some of the other ones, favorites, and some of the widgets to access or turn on Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, 4G, etc., etc. So the widgets here are great. On the Samsung front, you have the Android widgets and the Samsung widgets. They're separated when you go into, you press and hold on the home screen. The Samsung widgets are very bubbly, kind of following along on the path of, or following along on the color scheme of TouchWiz. They're very bubbly. They're very playful. You look at feeds and updates, for example. And there's no room on this page. Let's try to get it on one of these pages. Let's do it on this one. You look at feeds and updates, for example, and it's very bubbly. Again, it looks a lot like the iPhone, very colorful. I just don't feel like, A, it looks as good and as crisp as the HTC widgets, and B, if you look at the widget list, it's not as expanded as the HTC list is. You have your analog clocks, you have some digital clocks, but beyond the clocks, you really only have 2 or 3 different widgets. And, they're not incredibly customizable, whereas you saw with the messages widget there were 2 different options. In the calendar widget there was 3 different options. You look at this, it's kind of like all or nothing. You either want this widget or you don't want it. So kudos to HTC, they win that one. But let's take a look at messaging and see what comes pre-installed. Now on this one you have the standard Android keyboard, you have swipe as well. So 2 keyboards out of the box. On this one you have HTC's custom keyboard, and that's it out of the box. All you have is the custom keyboard. Although you may have, let me make sure, because you may have swipe. I can't remember if in this recent update they enabled swipe or not. They may. I'll have to check the settings, because I know on the EVO they just threw swipe on it with the latest maintenance update. So it at some point, if not right now, you may get swipe on this in the future. But let's say the quick brown skunk goes to the market. And it's funny because I've never been great on touchscreen keyboards, and I've always been concerned that with these smaller displays, 3.7, 3.6 inch displays, that I would have an issue. Not the case with this device. Despite being a 3.6 inch display, HTC's keyboard is fantastic. I like how the keys are spaced. They do a good job with the overall design, and with auto correction you can use it in landscape. And then if you want to, obviously, the EVO Shift, it does have the physical QWERTY keyboard, so you can use it from there. And it's a 4-row physical QWERTY with a dedicated row for the spacebar, my personal favorite, and a D-pad over here as well, which is cool. Now, that said, the keyboard does make it a little bit thicker. You look at this in comparison to the Fascinate, and you can see that the size is much different. It's obviously smaller than the Fascinate is, but much thicker in comparison. Let's see if I can hold that up. Much thicker in comparison to the Samsung Fascinate. On this side, you have the stock Android keyboard. Actually I'm going to mix it up. The slow green worm went into the ground. Try to mix up these. I want to treat all the animals fairly, so try to mix it up. The slow green worm went into the ground. So you can see typing's pretty easy. You can enable stuff like haptic feedback, and you can obviously use that in portrait or landscape. And then you have the option of swipe out of the box. Now there's some other alternatives in the Android market if you don't like these keyboards. You want to do something else. There's Swift Key in the Android market and a couple of other alternatives, but you do have 2 out of the box. Hey there, how are you doing? So you can see, use that obviously in portrait and in landscape as well. But you can just see this kind of trend across the board. I know I keep harping on this, but let's do, it's a fake number, but I'm going to send it anyway. You can see even the bubbly, the way the messages are sent on this device, the very bubbly, it's mimicking the iPhone very closely. You know, you go back into this, you see very, very much, very similar to the iPhone 4. So you look at web browsing on both of these devices because, you know, one, I'd like to see what it looks like on the smaller display versus the larger display, and two, different display technologies on both of these. Super AMOLED, standard display over here. So let's go on to Phone Dog. Pretty happening site, if I do say so myself. And load that up. It was already loaded on the Samsung Fascinate. Now it's important to note this is running Android 2.1, so there's no flash support out of the box right now. When this does go to Android 2.2, you will get that flash support. So when you look at this and you see that there's no flash capabilities, the pinch to zoom is obviously much faster on this one because there's nothing running in the background. There are no ads running in the background. So you see that pinch to zoom is faster on this device. Now this one is running Android 2.2. It does have flash, so you can see that the pinch to zoom is a little bit slower. So it's a trade-off. You know, obviously you can disable that, but when it, you know, out of the box it is enabled, so it's a fair test, and you can see that the ads are running. So it's up to you. You know, turn it off and not deal with it, or keep it on and deal with it a little bit slower. It's not bad once the page loads, but you can see that there still is a little bit there. Double tapping works just fine on either of these devices. You can see, whoops, I didn't mean to click the link. No! You can see, got in one last pinch to zoom before it opened up. So you can see, you know, again, very easy on both of these devices. And the typical Android browser options are here. Back, forward, you can add a bookmark. You can open up a second window while you're waiting for another one to load. So if you wanted to open up Sprint PCS and then flop back to Phone Dog, you could do that pretty easily on both of these devices.